Okay, so imagine this. It's election day in America. You grab your coffee, you kiss your wife goodbye, and head down to your local polling place. A church, a school gym, maybe a fire station. The kind of ordinary civic, small d democratic space that's been part of American life for generations. You're standing in line, chatting with your neighbors, when suddenly you look up and see armed federal agents. Not there to vote, not there to keep the peace, but there to observe, to monitor, to make sure things go the right way. If that image makes your stomach knot up, it should. Because what I'm about to talk about isn't some new Stephen King novel plot. It's not a plot twist from The Handmaid's Tale. It is, unbelievably, something powerful people in this country are openly floating. And the fact that we even have to discuss it says a lot about where we are. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another supplemental installment of Back Porch Files from Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, and I am your host. So let's just jump right in here and talk about the big, flashing red warning sign in the room. Donald Trump recently talking, very casually, very Trumpishly, about nationalizing elections. Now, for folks who don't spend their spare time mainlining civics textbooks, that sounds kind of vague, maybe even just bureaucratic. But what he's really talking about is a radical restructuring of how American elections work, moving control away from states and local governments and consolidating it at the federal level under, well, him and his allies. Here's the problem. That idea doesn't just bump up against the Constitution, it rear ends it at 90 miles an hour. The Constitution deliberately gives states broad authority over how they run elections. And it's not an accident. It's not an oversight. It's not some quirky footnote. It's a core feature of American federalism. The framers didn't want a single central authority controlling voting like a giant political remote control. They wanted power spread out, messy as that sometimes is. But Trump, the man who treats the Constitution like it was his personal wet wipe, to put it mildly, let's just say he's never exactly been burdened by constitutional constraints. To him, the Constitution seems to be less supreme law of the land and more hurdle. No one is buying the shtick. This isn't about making elections better or safer. If that were the goal, we'd be talking about things like easier voting access, better cybersecurity, more transparency, or stronger protections against interference, foreign or domestic. Even MAGA really doesn't think that. They simply like efforts to consolidate power into the hands of a guy who literally tried to overturn the last election when he lost. And if that doesn't set off alarm bells, I don't know what will. And if that's not bad enough, we have Steve Bannon, strolling into the situation like the ghost of authoritarianism past with his latest greatest hit. Recently, Bannon floated the idea that ICE agents, yes, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, would be stationed around polling places during the midterms, supposedly to prevent something. Fraud, chaos, an invasion of phantom illegal voters that only exist in MAGA fever dreams. Your guess is as good as mine. Because no one pushing this seems to have any actual evidence that millions of non-citizens are secretly voting. It is a fantasy that refuses to die no matter how many times it's debunked. And here's the part that matters. This isn't just creepy, it's illegal. There is a clear federal law that prohibits federal agents, including military personnel, from being at polling places in a way that could intimidate voters or interfere with elections. It's 18 U.S.C. 592, if you'd like to look it up for yourself. The law exists for a reason. America has a long, ugly history of powerful forces trying to scare people away from the ballot box, especially people of color. So, we drew a bright legal line. Federal muscle does not get to hang around polling places like a bunch of political bouncers deciding who belongs and who doesn't. The idea of ICE agents loitering around voting locations is not about election integrity. It's about voter intimidation, full stop. Even if they stood there silently, their mere presence would send a chilling message to immigrant communities, mixed status families, and frankly anyone who looks foreign enough in the eyes of the MAGA imagination. That's not democracy. That's pressure tactics dressed up in patriotism. Imagine the number of U.S. citizens who are registered to vote who would be afraid to show up at a polling place with ICE agents standing around it, given especially the events of January. Now, when you put Trump's talk of nationalizing elections together with Bannon's ICE polling place fantasy, a very ugly picture starts to come into focus. This is not normal politics. This isn't even aggressive partisanship. This is flirting with authoritarian playbook stuff. Centralized control, intimidation, and a willingness to bend or break democratic norms, constitutional principles, and laws themselves in order to maintain power. If it walks like fascism, if it talks like fascism, and it hangs around your polling place like fascism, maybe we should just call it what it is. Now, why is this happening right now? Why float these ideas as we launch 2026? It's because of the midterms. Because, and let's be real here, the GOP is terrified. They can sense the political winds shifting. They know that extreme positions, election denialism, and culture war obsession are turning off a lot of voters. They know that younger Americans, suburban voters, and even some traditionally conservative folks are deeply uneasy with this march towards authoritarianism. So, instead of moderating, instead of trying to actually appeal to more people, instead of trying to reflect the ultimate will of the entire constituency that they represent, they double down on fear and control. It's fear dressed up as strength. Fear wrapped in flag imagery. Fear with a very expensive haircut and a podcast microphone. They're scared of losing power. Scared of accountability. Scared of a democracy that doesn't automatically reward them. But here's the kicker. They're apparently not scared enough to stop acting like authoritarian bullies. They'd rather risk looking anti-democratic than risk losing an election. And that tells you everything you need to know about what's at stake. This isn't just about left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. It's about whether we still believe in free and fair elections. Whether we trust ordinary Americans to vote without being surveilled or intimidated, and whether the Constitution is more than just a prop for politicians who only like it when it benefits them. So when you hear Trump casually musing about nationalizing elections or Steve Bannon fantasizing about ICE at polling places, don't shrug it off as just more political noise. Take it seriously. Very seriously. Look, if you process what we know, the recent history of unfound claims about election fraud, Trump's total inability to accept criticism, let alone deal with a loss, and his fear at what awaits him and his cronies if the GOP loses the House and the Senate, there is utterly no way in the world that Trump and MAGA will do anything but cry foul if they lose. Their reaction to it will be a farcical symphony that will make all his whining and bellyaching in 2020 look like a kazoo recital. This is what we have to look forward to. Trump and company's plan will be to do everything they can think of to dictate what happens in the fall. At this point, the most patriotic thing we can do right now isn't to shout or win every argument online, but to simply show up, vote, and refuse to be bullied out of our own democracy. All right, so that's it for this week's installment of Back Porch Files. As always, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to download and listen to this episode. If you haven't heard about it or visited already, I want to mention that the podcast now has a website, www.neighborontheleft.com. You can find links for contact and all of our social media platforms. You can read blog posts that mirror the episodes. And you can also go to a web player that allows you to listen to or download every episode of the podcast. I'll be back on Tuesday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.